please welcome to the stage our final panel, Aaron Parnas, CJ Pearson, and moderated by Rachel Janfaza.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to Gallup and Kettering for having us for this conversation about Gen Z and democracy and where we go from here. I'm really honored and thrilled to be here today with CJ Pearson and Aaron Parnas, who are two of the leading voices in Gen Z politics, but I would argue in politics writ large, just given the shift in our media ecosystem. Aaron has a massive following with over 4 million followers on TikTok, but many millions elsewhere. And he is one of the fastest growing voices on Substack in particular. He gives breaking news updates multiple times a day. If you aren't subscribed or following him across the many platforms, I encourage you to do so. And CJ is a leading voice on the Republican side of the aisle. He is an influencer, content creator, and consultant working on influencer strategy for organizations, and he has also been dubbed one of the leading creators who has helped to shift the Republicans' appeal with young voters and has a massive audience as well. So thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So given the data that we've been looking at in this polling from Gallup and the Kettering Foundation, we see that many young adults express uncertainty about democracy. And I'm curious, what experiences or environments make it feel real and relevant in your perspective and like it's actually working for them?
Yeah, I think overall, if you look throughout the country, this spans demographics. There are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with our government right now, and probably for good reason, right? You look at the fact that we are nearing week 4 of a government shutdown. It doesn't look like Congress is doing much to get things done. And as someone who lives in D.C., I have a firsthand experience in seeing people really don't work much in this town, apparently. And I think a lot of young people feel the same way. And I think that the reason they feel that way is because a lot of the day-to-day things that they're dealing with aren't being addressed by many mainstream politicians. When people look at, the rise of Mamdani, which I talk about a lot, it's a very real reason why he's been able to strike the chord that he has in a city like New York, because there's an affordability crisis in America. For a long time, those on the left didn't talk about it. For a long time, those on the right didn't talk about it. And so I think that a lot of people say that, if we're electing these leaders, we actually want them to benefit our life in some type of tangible way. And so I think that's why we've seen a kind of decline in the idea among some younger voters and as to whether or not democracy is working for them. But I think that at the end of the day, what we've been able to see is that democracy does work, because if you don't like the direction that our country is going, then you're free to change it, as the people in New York will likely make the decision to do in voting for Mamdani. Well, that's not something I would do. That's their prerogative. And if that works for them, then democracy has worked. If it doesn't, then they have the opportunity to vote again and to right that ship when it's that opportunity. So I think that, for all the reasons that people have misgivings about democracy right now, they should realize that it's democracy that may have gotten us into some of these messes, but it's also going to be the vehicle for change that gets us out of it as well.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree with more. But I will say this, looking back over the past however long polling has existed, approval rating for our institutions has been 20%, 30%. When has Congress had a positive approval rating? It just hasn't. So it's not necessarily unique to Gen Z, but what is unique to Gen Z and young people right now is social media. Social media has really exacerbated kind of the threat many people feel that democracy is under right now. Social media, every morning and every night, Gen Z scrolls for about an hour on TikTok or Instagram or any other social media platform. And social media rewards outrage, rewards misinformation, rewards conspiracy theories, rewards headlines like democracy is under attack. And so when you're fed that information hours every single day, when Gen Z isn't consuming information from TV or from print, doesn't even know what a radio is, you get a situation where all you know is democracy is under attack. I do agree, democracy is working, and democracy, to me, I think will survive even this period that we're in. But at the same time, if you don't actually educate young people on the current state of affairs in our nation, then you're going to get a situation where the young people of today become the elderly of tomorrow, and then everyone thinks that democracy is failing, not just young Americans.
I think to follow up to the point that you just made about the role that social media has played in this, I think it's important to note that there are no editorial standards on TikTok. There are no editorial standards on Instagram. And so you're able to label anyone that you wish, a fascist or whatever it may be, whatever word of choice, on both the left and the right. And many people, just take that and they run with it. And so I think that's a big reason why so many people feel, as you just said, that democracy is under attack, even though, again, we just had an election. We will have several more elections, and as far as I know. So I think that's the thing that is really interesting to me. And also, too, it's like, the question is, though, like, how do you actually police that? You really can't, because it's just, then you get into the issue of censorship, right? I don't know.
So we're going to get into all of that. You guys are getting a little bit ahead of me. But CJ, you mentioned the affordability crisis and the fact that many young people in this country just feel like life isn't affordable for them and that the cost of living is too high. How do today's social and economic circumstances shape Gen Z's expectations for democracy? And what can we learn from their relationship to that and to civic engagement?
Yeah, I think going back to kind of my first answer is that I think because so many young people have anxiety in this country right now about the economic state of our nation, whether or not they'll ever be able to afford a home, how they're going to be able to afford that apartment in the city that they've always dreamed that they would one day live in. It's kind of created a, some would say, unrealistic expectation upon government and its ability to provide those things to them. I think maybe with a different philosophy as to, how to actually address that, because I think the affordability issue is important in the sense that, like, no one should be struggling to buy everyday goods and all of those things or whatever. Are you going to be able to buy that super nice, cozy or, cushy apartment in New York City? Maybe not. Maybe go spend some time in Oklahoma for a bit. I don't know. But it's just a matter of expectations. And a lot of people, it's so interesting to me. It's like you go on TikTok and they'll say, I can't believe it's so expensive to live in New York City. Well, then don't live in New York City. It's so expensive to live in D.C. Then don't live in D.C. And so I think that while it's important for our leaders to address these issues through actual policies that work and will bring down the cost of these these everyday necessities, tackle inflation, all of those things, I also think, too, is that young people cannot expect the government to provide for everything on their wish list, and also, in that same vein, be upset at the government when they're not able to actually meet them where they are.
Yeah, I actually agree. And I think that one of the reasons why we're in that situation is because media literacy, ethics, and civics aren't taught in all schools across the country. So young people don't know how government works and what the federal government is supposed to do versus state government versus local government. Congress was never intended to bring down specific costs of housing in a specific municipality in a random city in America. That's the job of the state legislature. That's the job of local government. But most young people don't understand that, and that's not their fault. That's the fault that, politicians run on a message, we're going to eliminate student debt, get into Congress or get into the White House, and aren't able to accomplish that. They're going to reduce the cost of housing. They run on that message, and then it doesn't actually happen. And so young people get disenchanted. They don't turn out. They think that Congress and the federal government isn't working for them. And it's this constant cycle, and it happens on the right. It happens on the left. It happens across the board.
Well, I'm glad to hear you guys agree, because I think sometimes, if people look at social media, they see varying viewpoints, they think there's no room for agreement, and you're clearly proving that wrong. I also, you bring up this point about the expectations, and this is a generation that has grown up with instant gratification on these very platforms, getting information so quickly, and sometimes I think the speed at which Gen Z thinks that the world works or that democracy works doesn't actually keep up with the way it does in practice. How then do we help young people feel like they actually have a stake in democracy if they aren't necessarily seeing their efforts play out in practice?
By a few things. Number one, teaching, right? Getting civics into all the schools, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. So running younger candidates, getting people who look like young people into public office, getting young people on TV and cable news. Young people want to consume news from people that look like them, right? Number two. Number three, amplify young voices in corporations and media, across the board. The old guard of our country, older folks, need to recognize that young people don't want to listen to them. And a lot of the times it's simply because of their age. whether or not that's fair, but that's just the truth. And so you have to start amplifying younger voices. You cannot tell them to wait their turn. And especially you can't say, listen, I went through these hardships and therefore you have to go through these hardships. No. Gen Z is kind of writing its own path, and it's time for Gen Z to be amplified a little more.
You're going to get me in trouble, but I agree with Aaron on a lot of that. I would say, also to stop lying to young people, right? When you float these pie-in-the-sky policy proposals as if there's going to be some overnight change, and those things don't happen, young people lose trust. They lose trust in institutions, they lose trust in politicians, and it's just not realistic, in large part because our government wasn't designed to be a type of overnight fix. The Senate moves incredibly slow. Congress moves incredibly slow as a whole. And so when you're running on these immediate fixes to very, very deep and complex problems that don't have those types of immediate gratification or whatever else, people are going to be disappointed. And that's why, truly and truthfully, there are a lot of people on the right who are just freaking out about Mom Donnie in New York City. I want the guy to win. I actually don't care. I don't live in New York City. So he can win, and I want him to actually try to achieve the very many things that he has promised that he can achieve. Many things are actually not in the purview of the local government of New York City, because I believe that then people will realize that lofty promises on either side need to be actually questioned. Just because someone makes slick videos on TikTok or is well-spoken doesn't mean that you should buy into what they say. And again, that is not relegated to one side. That is on both sides of the aisle. But it is only then when I think you vote for something, you get a high off of it, and then you realize, oh, that person actually had no idea how to accomplish what they said, is when you actually are going to start asking tougher questions the next go around. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, can't be fooled again. That's a quote from J. Cole. Great rapper, by the way. So I think in all of that, I'm really curious about what the NYC election does and the ramifications long-term it will have on how young people feel about democracy and how young people feel about politicians in general, because obviously he has a huge support among young voters. Curious to see how they hold him accountable.
So we know, thanks to Gallup research, that trust in institutions is exceptionally low, especially when it comes to Gen Z. You both have built massive audiences of people who trust you across platforms and are part of this shifting media ecosystem. What kinds of civic spaces, community networks, or institutions help young people see that their participation in democracy actually does matter?
So I actually don't think it's any kind of established institution. I actually think organizing and community building happens more in a local neighborhood where young people go outside and play hide and seek with each other nowadays, or even on Roblox online if you're a young person, rather than in any established institution. Because I think, and it happens from both the right and the left, institutions have failed us. They have failed us for many years, especially this year, but the right will say institutions have failed us because of the weaponization of the Justice Department allegedly last year. The left will say institutions have failed us in a lot of ways because media companies have sold out to this administration, sane-washing what this administration is doing. So young people don't trust, whether you're on the right or the left, they don't trust legacy institutions. And so I really think that the most community organizing that's happening is actually in communities, in these spaces where young people can see each other face-to-face or interact with each other online, because it's not happening with the traditional institutions.
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to it from the right. I think, as far as in-person institutions go, I think you've definitely seen post the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a lot of on-campus organizing happening on the right that a lot of young people have gotten involved in. I think we've seen 60,000 requests for new chapters all across the country for Turning Point to be started. I think online it's very decentralized, because I think that the same reason that a lot of people have lost trust in institutions, that trust has shifted to personalities and people, right? They're not trying to follow a CNN anymore or an MSNBC or whatever. They're trying to follow people that they trust. People trust Aaron, people trust you, and because of the way they feel about you guys, they're just okay, what they say matters to me. It doesn't matter what their publication says or what their boss says or whatever, I trust them. And so I think we've seen, we're obviously that creates a lot more responsibility on the shoulders of creators to be responsible arbiters of truth for our audiences and to be authentic. And it does muddy the waters in a sense, right? Because like influencers are not journalists, creators are not journalists. Oftentimes there are instances where you can get paid for someone to say, hey, for $10,000 you can make a video about this. And to our audience, maybe it's, maybe if it's labeled an ad, they know that it's sponsored content, but you don't have to do that the way that the law is currently written. And so I think that's going to be an interesting gray area once people learn more about how that all works, that like creators can literally be bought and paid for. I think that you run the risk of that same level of trust that we've seen erode towards institutions, eroding towards influencers as well.
I mean, I will say if you look online at, I would say about 40% of political content nowadays is paid for, but you will never know it because you actually don't have to label any political content an ad. The FEC is 4-4, they're never going to get anything done. They're at gridlock. The FTC doesn't actually regulate political content. So there's millions of dollars being flown in on the right and the left into creators to push narratives, and their audience doesn't ever actually realize it, and it's actually one of the scariest things right now to me.
So along those lines, we have sort of circled around the topic of the difference between a journalist and a content creator, and the line is increasingly blurred every single day. And I'm curious if you have, in your perspective, a way that you draw the line between a journalist and a content creator, and also, are you talking about that on your platform for your followers to understand?
I mean, I think all journalists are content creators, but not all content creators are journalists. And what I mean by that is I think journalism, you're creating content, whether you're on radio, cable, print. Social media has just given people a different medium to present journalism. And so I think any journalist on social media is also a content creator. I do consider myself a journalist because I actually do source a lot of the stories that I cover myself. I get thousands of tips in my email inbox every single day. I run down stories myself. I don't get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for political content and never would. But there are very few people who, like me, have kind of those ethical standards in a way. I was a lawyer before I did any of this. I would never put anything out on my platform that I wouldn't put in front of a judge. If I lied in front of a judge, I would get disbarred. If I lied to my audience, I feel like I should deserve that same repercussion. But there are a lot of people, kind of like CJ was saying earlier, that would call themselves a journalist but are not. They're just political commentators. And it happens all the time. But unfortunately, because social media rewards outrage and rewards kind of the big headlines, that line is becoming increasingly blurred, and you actually don't know whether the information you're getting is even accurate anymore. And honestly, even with the rise in AI, it's actually become even scarier. I was scrolling on TikTok the other day, and there was a video of Anderson Cooper pops up, and it's my video. Anderson Cooper is using this AI version of Anderson Cooper is using my exact video, but it's just him talking in his voice, and it's my exact script. And I saw that, and I was like, wow, and it wasn't labeled AI at all by TikTok. That is scary to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a rapidly evolving landscape that I think that many people are still trying to really understand. I think I would agree that, content creators are not inherently journalists, but I think every journalist is having to become a content creator to continue their relevance, right? If you look at every Fox News primetime anchor right now, they're all on TikTok. And it's because they realize they have to adapt outside of just the, typical audience that is tuning in at 9 p.m. every single night. I think for me, I wouldn't consider myself a journalist. I'm not, talking to anyone off the record on background or doing anything like that. I'm very opinion driven. And I think that that's totally fine as long as that's what you're providing your audience and they know that's what they're getting from you. I think that if you portray yourself as a journalist, but you're really just an opinion journalist or an opinion columnist or whatever it may be, then that's when, the question of trust comes into play. But I think that's where media literacy is very important, is that it's important for audiences to be able to discern, is this person a content creator, an influencer, a pundit, basically, or are they an actual journalist, which is, I think that's the biggest crisis in our country right now, outside of the civics crisis, is the lack of media literacy in this country. I remember when it was like a funny thing that people would say, oh, the boomers, they get tricked by those Facebook stories, like Barack Obama, his birth certificate found in random thing. It's crazy. but now it's like AI. Like, I saw a video of a dog fighting a bald eagle, and it looked very, very real. And I was like, there is no way this is not real. And I was like, I would have chose the bald eagle, but that bald eagle, hey, it's not here anymore. But what I'm telling you is that like all of this stuff is so surreal and crazy, and like AI is gonna do to Gen Z what like those clickbait sites did to our grandparents. It's insane.
Yeah. Okay, we have a lot of people in the room who are practitioners in institutions and sort of more in the traditional world. And I'm curious what your advice is as you think about the new media ecosystem. And yes, a journalist, there's a difference between a journalist and a content creator. But as you said, the eyeballs are on content creators. The audiences are there. We live in an attention economy. How can content creators work with legacy institutions to create a multi-generational way to communicate that resonates with Gen Z?
Well, I think the question should actually be flipped. It should be, how should legacy institutions work with content creators? Because content creators are willing and open. A lot of legacy institutions aren't. And until legacy institutions open their door and say, you know what, we're open to collaborating with a content creator, we're open to working with it. Legacy institutions are very afraid of brand safety issues. They don't want to touch content creators that'll get them canceled. Every content creator will get you canceled. Every content creator has a problem at some point in their life. You have to be willing to work with us. And I think that's the biggest thing. The first step is really jumping into the deep end and saying, okay, finally, we will work with the creator. We will outreach onto TikTok or Instagram. Until legacy institutions do that, it's not gonna happen. Content creators have always and are willing to work with you all, so.
I would agree, and I would also say, like, in the course of your reporting, cultivate sources that are influencers. Because if you think about influencers, to be good at being an influencer, you have to have your finger on the pulse of your audience. So when you're trying to figure out what is the progressive base thinking about, what are they saying? What is the conservative base thinking about? What are they saying? These people read their comments, they read their DMs. As Aaron said, he gets thousands of messages every single day in his email inbox. So in terms of having our finger on the pulse, it's incredible because it's just, I'm able to say, okay, whether I'm sitting across from someone at the White House or talking to a reporter, people really don't like this issue right now, or maybe we should message this better. And because of the immediate insights I get from my audiences, every time I post a video, I'm aware of that really keenly. But again, I would definitely agree with what he said. I think influencers, creators are definitely willing and able, want to be helpful to a lot of folks in the traditional media. That door just has to be open. We've seen an evolution of that. You see now the Ruthless podcast, and Brett Cooper is a prominent YouTuber on the right. She's just joined Fox News. Like, a lot of these platforms are welcoming influencers on MSNBC. I see they have Cameron Kasky on a good bit. He's a Dem influencer. So I think it's starting to evolve slowly but surely, but I think that door has to be open about traditional media first for it to be effective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, our final question for you both. What new democratic practices, either online or in person, have Gen Z already adopted, and where do you see this momentum going from here?
I think Gen Z has become their own fact checkers. It's pretty interesting to see. I think I can post a video on TikTok, and I will have maybe sometimes 100, 200, 300 videos criticizing or fact-checking what I just posted. Sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it's right, whatever. But it only helps the content that I produce, actually, because it shows me what other people are thinking, young people, what they're thinking about the issue that I'm talking about. So Gen Z has become our own fact-checking machine. And it has its pros and its cons. They're not actually relying, most of these fact-checkers are not relying on legitimate facts. They're relying on their opinions or what they think, right? But it is creating a kind of this new age environment where Gen Z is, and young people as a whole, not just Gen Z, they're really just adapting to this new media landscape, and they're actually being interested in the news, and they're interested in what's happening in government. And I think that's so important. I think the more, it really just shows that they're getting interested, and I think that's where it's going in the future as well.
Yeah, I would say, democracy is nothing without levers of accountability, right? And that accountability is either coming from the voters, it's coming from the media, or some other type of institution. And Gen Z is very good at holding their leaders accountable online. They will flood those DMs, they will flood those comments. And one thing that's really interesting to me, and I'm someone who is a supporter of Israel, is that there is a platform called Track AIPAC. And it's a Gen Z Instagram page which tracks all the donations that AIPAC has made to members of Congress, presidential candidates, all of that stuff. And when they post you on that account, oh my God. I mean, I don't even, it's crazy. And I'm like, wow. But like, that's a completely organic thing. And at the end of the day, like, you know, it's all public information in that sense, but like dogged in terms of their pursuit of truth and holding themselves accountable based on their ideology, whether it's left or right. In that respect, it's about AIPAC, but I'm sure there's pro-Israel accounts that are also holding people accountable for supporting Palestine. So it's interesting. I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I think Gen Z really demands accountability from not only their elected leaders, but also their influencers. They want to make sure that you're actually living what you're saying and you're truthful to who you are. And we've seen many cancellations because of that. It's been quite interesting.
Thank you both so much, and thank you to Gallup and Kettering.
Thank you so much.